Hi, I'm Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. Welcome to our town. I was going to say this will be the highest ranking our town we've ever had, but I had my wife and my daughter on this last week, so second place. We have two justices from the Kansas Supreme Court. We have Mara Luckett, who's a Goodland native, I learned today, Associate Justice, and we have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Lawton Nuss, over yonder. We had the pleasure of meeting at the National Cowboy Poetry Contest in Abilene, Kansas. What an event that was.
It was a great event. People from, like 10 different states came to compete to see who was going to be the national champion. And I think I added up the number of poems that you and I judged over the space of 2 days, and it was 82 different presentations, but it was all fun.
They were fantastic. It was a great event. So this Our Town show is really about what's good in our community, and that was a good 2 days for Abilene.
It was great.
I'm convinced that the Dawsons are going to add a lot of value over the coming years using that format. So today, the camera can't see it, but you and I got to see it. You were on the stage and I was in the seats, and I think this is an 800-seat auditorium, and had not quite that many, but pretty close to it, of high school students from nine different schools, and they were here to listen to you present how the courts work, how it functions, and you even gave them a test case, and I thought that was pretty cool. Tell us about what you told the kids today and how it went.
Well, we started with the basic civics lessons, the three branches of government, checks and balances, how the court system works with the other two branches of government, and then led them through an actual United States Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Entertainment Industry Association, which dealt with a California statute where the legislature there decided to ban the sale of violent video games to minors.
Incredibly good choice for a bunch of high school kids, was it not? Everybody listened. There wasn't anybody playing on their phones. I mean, they were listening to you. Very cool.
Really something they can relate to, I think.
Why do you do this? Why do you take your time to go travel to high schools and do this?
Well, we travel to high schools, and we also speak to service organizations. For example, we spoke to the Kiwanis Club in Marion before we came to the auditorium today. We have spoken to other groups throughout the state. And the whole idea is to, first of all, give people a little bit of an overview about our court system, remind people who studied about separation of powers in school that it is still a concept in our Constitution, and then to bring it into real personal interest. We try to pick up on cases like you just indicated, find something that is of direct interest to high school students, violent video games. We pick up other cases that would be of interest to different types of audiences. And we're hoping that when they leave the presentation or the discussion that they have a good reminder or a good educational experience so they can understand what makes their court system different from the other two branches of government.
I thought it was pretty interesting. I sat in the middle row up there, and when you were talking about separation of powers, I was thinking about the conflicts that we see in the news every day about the branches of government, and there is this pull between the branches. Sometimes from this seat it looks chaotic, but it's by design, right? That's what you presented today.
It is. Our founders really intended for that to be the system, that one branch would check against another branch. And as you said, tension is inherent in that kind of a system.
Question for you, hypothetical, Chief Justice Lawton Nuss over there. What would happen if one branch just quit doing their job?
Well, I fall back on a quote that Justice Lukert and I have talked about back and forth over the years from James Madison, who is known as kind of the author of the Constitution of the United States. And he basically says that the consolidation of power in the hands of just one person or one small group of people is the very definition of tyranny. And it gets back to why he and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and others were so concerned about separating the power of the government. And so my answer to your question, of course, would be if one branch just stops doing its job, then that leaves a vacuum for the other two branches to fill. Or you can say our system is just out of balance, and it is destroying what the founding fathers put together in the 1780s.
I confess to have a great interest, but I think I also have what most citizens do, which is a short time frame measurement, right? So I see what's current today, or even in my span of my interest of life, and that seems to be the totality. Well, it's not the totality. From James Madison to however long we make it is the totality of America that this system is intended to help us in. But we see the ebbs and flows of branches not as aggressive or failing to do their job in some area. You know, as citizens, that's the bias that we bring in, what we see. Somebody's not doing their job. But if we make it long enough, the balance is perfectly designed to work. I think that's the genius of the American system.
That and people remembering that the rule of law is what it is all about. Not just the courts, but for all the branches to remember that the rule of law is the basis for that entire function of the three branches, the checks and balances and the constitutional powers.
Yeah, the rule of law we hear a lot, and I like to add to that, and the right to petition said law. We can petition to our elected officials, we can petition to the courts, and we can petition the executive branch. And as long as those abilities are not taken from us, balance will come back, won't it?
I believe so. You're obviously talking about the rights under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and the Bill of Rights to the Kansas Constitution has a lot of those same rights enumerated there.
Right. You know, we said in a school district, and I'm not going to talk about the current case on financing, but I think this is applicable to what's good news in the community. You're here. You had to stand in front of 800 students today and a bunch of administrators and a bunch of 8th Judicial District judges over there. That's exposure of the judicial system to the public, I think, in an unprecedented way. I'm impressed that you're here, exposing yourself to people. I think that's incredibly healthy.
Well, Justice Lukert and I traveled to Kansas Wesleyan University in Salina several weeks ago for a discussion on a stage like this, and we took with us a retired Kansas Supreme Court justice whose seat I actually took on the court 14 years ago. And I said to him, I'm not trying to be argumentative or to make an attack on you, but in the 20 years that I was a lawyer in Kansas, I only saw 2 justices outside of the Kansas Supreme Court courtroom twice. One in Kansas City and one in Lincoln, Kansas. And I said, I just thought that was something that needed to be changed. Justice Lukert has agreed with me. Our colleagues who are on the court now have agreed with us. And we are making an effort to come out so people can see that we're not just 7 mysterious people in black robes behind a curtain pulling levers and making
I looked
decisions
in my
that affect
closet
us.
for a black robe and I didn't have one. So first, I've already said thank you. What a great thing that we had today. Let me go a little deeper with Justice Lukert. I know how you presented to these students that judges are selected, because that was a question from the audience today. You answered that question. You answered the question on, do special interest influence you? And you said in a longer way, no, because we refuse to. We let the Constitution and the law guide us. But your people. This is how the people can have access to the judicial system without bringing a case in front of you, by person-to-person interaction. I think that more should do it. You come from Goodland.
I do.
We have a Goodland system. We'll play it out there for you. How's that?
Good.
And that's a long ways from here. yet the governing of the society out there has to work just the same as Topeka, Manhattan, Wichita. That's a complex formula if you forget the rule of law. If we just did what we thought was right, is what I'm going towards,
Right.
I guess.
Well, what we often talk about is and I think I mentioned it a little bit in the presentation today, that our Constitution is what guides the justices and all the judges in the state. We take an oath to support it. And we don't take an oath to support necessarily the acts passed by the legislature.
Sure.
They have to be constitutional. And the reason our oath is to the Constitution and not to the legislative acts is because the Constitution has been approved by the people of Kansas. It's the people's document.
Right.
And the legislative acts are passed by a legislature who are elected by their representatives. But the Constitution is the only document I'm aware of in which all the voters of Kansas get a chance to say yes or no on it.
I watched the students while you gave that answer, and you see two people look at each other and they're passing a look or nodding their head. That means they understand and it's important to them. There was a lot of that going on there. That's relevant information, I think, to people. Young people all want change. Well, you told them how to achieve it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are ways to do that under the rule of law.
Under the rule of law. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of what I would consider great questions that somebody asked me. So how important is it that these 800 young people out here, Justice Lukert, were influenced positively today by two people representing the rule of law?
Well, as citizens and voters, they are an important check on the government. We've talked about the three branches of government being checks on each other, but the voters are the ultimate check. And so voters need to understand that government and what it does and why it functions the way it does to be able to make their informed decisions in the voters' booth and as they petition the government, as you mentioned. And they are the people that need to be doing that along with all of us as well.
I've always considered the of, by, and for the people statement a cool statement, but people need to stop and think. Two of those are action items for us, the citizen. Before we get to for, of and by have to occur.
Very much so.
Yeah. So one more. As you look at the challenges of Kansas and those young people, what would you represent the hope to be for the rule of law for people who are 16, 17, and 18? What do you hope to have put in a vision today that they will carry forward, seeing clearly a message? What are you trying to impart to these people today?
What I'd like to impart is their confidence that we have a system, and it's not chaotic, it's not irrational, it's not idiosyncratic, it does not change day to day to day based on the whims of somebody or some organization that is in power. We have a system that's based on logic, the rule of law, and if they will do their part to support that, then we'll be fine. It's when they have no interest in their state government, have no interest in seeing the rule of law applied, that I become concerned.
Justice Lukert, your answer.
Very much the same. We, again, need to all be involved citizens. We need to make sure that we are improving our community, our state, and our country, and to take an active voice and an active interest to educate ourselves about that system and to make responsible choices as voting citizens.
That's the good side. Now the bad. What's the dangers facing us as a citizenry in Kansas? What actions taken would result in problems for the balance you've outlined, for the goodness you just described, for the vision you hope for? What will it take to break that?
As a follow-up to that,
Yeah.
People being interested in their government and saying, I don't agree with this policy, I don't agree with what was done as a decision, I want to express my dissatisfaction. But I hear so many people, although they have the right to vote, they don't exercise it. They say, I'm too busy, or I don't want to get informed, or nothing's going to change, so I'm not going to bother. I would just urge people to be paying attention, educate themselves, and exercise their rights under the Constitution to petition their government, also to speak out through freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of the media, even though that's not one of the listed rights. They just cannot sit back and let things happen. They need to be involved.
Okay. Justice Lukert?
Well, for us, one of the things that we need to stress to people is the importance of fair and impartial courts in our system. And as we told the students earlier, that our founders recognized that the courts are the least powerful branch of the government, and that because of that, they are perhaps the easiest to ignore. And there have been times in history that executive officers have said, we're not going to follow that order. We don't like that order. And then there have been others, such as the example with President Eisenhower enforcing Brown versus Board of Education, where even though he didn't personally like the decision, he brought the power of the executive branch to help enforce the order.
101st Airborne.
101st Airborne is right. And the people need to understand their role in protecting fair and impartial courts. And the importance of that is that all of us are protected when we can walk into a court and know that the court is the great leveler. It's the leveler regardless of whether you're a big corporation or an individual, whether you are rich or poor, smart or educated or not educated. It is the leveler. But it can only be that if all of us work to protect that impartiality.
If my fellow cowboy poet judge will ask me what I think of that, I'd like to answer it.
Fellow National Cowboy Poetry Rodeo Judge, Dennis, what do you think?
Both answers, couldn't agree with more. We talk about the millennials, right? They're the ones who have the most ready to change the nation, right there in the grasp of their hands. But have they got a hold of it? They're most informed generation I've ever seen. The question is whether they will act on it in a voting booth and act on it in the halls of government. I beg young people to get involved with local government. Find out what's happening at the places you have the ability to see your work change things. I think it's a great hope of government is to get young people involved locally, because they will see change happening, and all young people want change to happen, and they want to be responsible for it. It's pretty hard for them to say, I'm going to change the outcome of the Kansas Supreme Court, although both of you told us today that they can by pursuing the rule of law and voting in the voting booth. But that seems a long ways off to young people, right? But I'm here to tell you that local government is an open door for young people to come in and make positive change in your community. I think it's a great hope of Kansas if we get young people involved, like these 800 people you spoke to today. If we can get those people engaged, gosh, we're going to be able to sit back and judge cowboy poetry, and you can go to Goodland and watch cowboy football games, and life will be good. That's my answer.
And that's a challenge for all of us in our generation as well, is to do what we can to get them motivated and interested in their government. Because if you just sit back, I look at other countries around the world where their citizens sat back and did nothing, and it's just a disaster.
That outcome's not good, is it?
It is not.
I'm not the quoter of the founding fathers that you are by chapter and verse, but I'm fairly well versed in what they said and what they meant. The great experiment that is America is unique, and it was formed on ideals that are so firmly set in things that work is why we're here. Okay, so the engaged population that you've both spoke to, they said not only do we need to be engaged, but we need to be of a sufficient character to be engaged to make this work, because our rule of law and our freedom is so wide that if we don't self-regulate our behavior, the rule of law won't be sufficient to contain us. I think that's the brilliance of the American freedom model. We don't put any barriers on great things we can do. We try to just keep the bottom edges floated together. And nobody else in the world does that anywhere like we do here in America. So we got 2 minutes. He gave me the 2-minute sign. I've learned that 2 minutes gives you plenty of time to say what your most important thought of today is. And so, Chief Justice, we'll start with you, Lawton Nuss.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to what Justice Lukert had said. She was quoting To Kill a Mockingbird, as I recall.
My daughter's
And-
favorite book.
And she and I also like to quote a former justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, who talks about that same basic theme. And she says, not everything in life is fair. We all understand that. But there has to be some place in this world where you can go and air your grievances and try to win, where might does not make right.
Correct.
And where money is not important, and you can try to get justice done. And she said that place is supposed to be the courtroom.
Has to be the
It
courtroom.
has to be the courtroom. And if it's not in the courtroom, then where's it going to be?
Yeah,
Where
well-
are people going to go?
Yeah, if it's not the courtroom, it's Main Street with pistols, and nobody wants that. So, Justice Lukert.
Well, we'd like to thank the people of Marion for having us today.
Yes,
It's been
well
a
done.
wonderful experience.
Well
We
done,
started
Judge
in the-
Powers, Lee Liker.
Yes, all of those people who caused that to happen. We started in the elementary school this morning talking with them about the three branches of government and let the principal veto their decision, and the students overrode the veto.
Oh, wow, that had to be fun.
And we've continued that through the day. We've all, like all other communities in Kansas, have a very strong and solid judiciary, and we're very proud of our local judges and the work they do every day to support the communities. And we hope that people of Kansas will recognize what an asset those judges and their communities are to their local government and to the state as a whole.
Well, I'm confident that the viewers of Eagle Local 2 all across our region, and we push this content pretty widely, will have a better view of the Kansas judiciary than they've ever had because of your contributions today on this stage in front of the students that'll be talking to them when they get home and what they see on camera today. So well done again. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
It was great to see you, sir. Nice to meet you, ma'am. And it was a great time. I'm glad we could share just a little bit of it on Eagle Local 2. For the Kansas Supreme Court, Chief Justice Lawton Nuss and Associate Justice Marla Lukert, I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communications, and you have a great day.